that I'm blessed. It's a few L's and millions, so turn that loss to a check.
All right, guys, welcome to the Father Alchemist. Today I have a very special guest, Daphne Mosko.
Hi.
And super excited to have her on today. So I'm just going to read a few of the things that for me really impressed me and just got me more excited to have you on, because I think that this translates into so many different areas, right? So she is really a master, guys, at body work, structural integration. She got her she graduated with honors from the Massage Therapy Institute of Colorado in 2003. What else? She studied a bunch of different modalities. So she has studied everything from visceral manipulation, craniosacral therapy, Reiki, some say Reiki, I don't know how you pronounce it, yeah. Reiki, Hakomi, Mayan abdominal massage, which I can't wait to hear more about. And I think what I was most fascinated by, that I was really intrigued with, because I think it has a parallel to business and entrepreneurship, is this last sentence: scientific grounding and intuitive touch and a deep understanding of the connection of the mind, body, and spirit, and how pathologies can be liberated to review greater functionality and higher consciousness. So with that, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
And can you share with people, why don't you just, from your perspective, kind of who you are and a little bit more about this work that you do?
Yeah, so I do manual therapy. I've studied, like all the things that you've talked about. One of the things that I've really, in both between my personal journey as well as just how the work's come to me and my education, it's gotten a lot more involved in the body mind. So I treat a lot of trauma. Like my client that I had just before I came in here was abused regularly by her husband for a long time. And she's been divorced. Her kids are older, but she hasn't had the manual work to actually start rewiring. She's done a lot of the emotional work. And, it starts coming out of the system. There's shaking. It's held in the system in a way into the physiology. We call it into the nervous system. But there's a whole conversation of, is it in the fourth phase of water, where the emotions are actually held in the water, in the structure of the water in our body. Okay. Our bodies are a perfect three-dimensional representation of our body, mind, spirit, our biography up until this point. And we can do so much in so many realms. We can do our meditation to really shift our belief systems, or go to therapy to change our old patterning. And then we can also do work on our physical level. There's people like that client I had before. She's done so much of the other work, but it's still held in her body.
That's amazing, because I feel like when somebody has a trauma or they've gone through something, and it could be codependency, it could be a marriage and a divorce, an argument within the marriage that is causing tension. They want to go see, a therapist for that. Could be addiction from earlier on that they're working through. A million things, right? But typically, and what comes to mind for me is, you go see a therapist that really addresses, I guess, the mind, right? And then you have the spiritual component, which I think can be probably very different for different people, right? It could be the traditional sense, Christian, Catholic, which is religious.
You can be religious without being spiritual, or vice versa, right?
Vice versa. But whatever that spiritual component is for you, but very few people, I think, really talk about and explore the body as a means to treating trauma, like on a deep level. So how would you say that these three components to treating trauma are equal, or one of them takes precedence?
It's individual. Everybody's on their own journey. Some people need a lot more work in the mind before their body will resist, or you shift, they have too much resistance in it. And you'll see it. I mean, you'll see it in their structure, how people hold themselves. There's people that are, they have that slumped shoulders and they're forward and they're covering their heart, right? And you immediately know, just from looking at them physically, there's an emotional state that goes with that, right? There's people that walk around a little bit more like a rooster. Big arms and showing off all the time.
What does that mean?
Because just a little curious about that one yourself.
Asking for a friend.
Well, a lot of times those people are really boisterous. They're outgoing. That could also be overshadowing shame.
Sure.
You know, like let me be bigger so that you can't notice my faults. You can't see my shortcomings.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. And when somebody's sort of, hunched like that or protecting their heart, like you said, is that like somewhere, to me, that seems like a lack of self-confidence, but ultimately that's coming from
a lack of self-confidence is it. The root of so much of all of these comes down to usually a sense of self-worth to some degree or another. Like almost everything boils down to I'm not loved, I'm not worthy. These stories and beliefs. And where it gets stuck, we in my work, we treat both the neurology, the brain and nerves, as well as the heart, right? So all the acupuncture points are basically on points that are either major areas for nerves or vascular to bifurcate or shift or come more superficial. So a lot of the work that I do is in this neurovascular system. So if we think about it, our heart connects with thousands of miles of blood vessels through our system, and our brain connects with thousands of miles of nerves through our head. And when you look at the body, I've done an extensive amount of dissection. They're always intertwined. They're intermeshed. The nerves that we say is this one nerve, like the vagus. Everybody loves to talk about the vagus nerve, right? But the vagus nerve, anastomosis is, which means it comes together with all of these nerves. It comes in and out. So we think of the vagus nerve as this one separate nerve, but it's intertwined with all these blood vessels.
For those that don't know what the vagus nerve is, can you share?
So the vagus nerve is the 12th cranial nerve. It's really popular with this whole polyvagal theory, which is showing up both in things like trauma as well as chronic illness where the vagus nerve doesn't downregulate. They say it's a parasympathetic. So there's the sympathetic, which is fight or flight, and parasympathetic is rest and digest. And when it gets activated, the body has a hard time downregulating. And it shows up and it touches every organ in the body. But like I said, it also interstitiates. So there's areas where it goes in and gets tied up into ganglia, which are these basically this yarn of ball of nerve bundles that are in different places. So at a certain point, it's hard to figure out, well, and then they mix in with each other in this ball. So then it's really hard to figure out, well, what's what at that point.
And when a body doesn't have the ability to downregulate, I would imagine that as a result of not being able to downregulate, there's sickness and illness that comes as a result of it. What would be some of the, like, give a couple of examples of what, like, not being able to downregulate would be? Like, I think of not being able to go to sleep, maybe because you're either high energy or you're watching TV until the last second or looking on your phone.
Totally.
What are some other examples of not being
chronic fatigue syndrome? Would definitely be one of those. It could be anxiety where you there can be real anxiety where you're getting a divorce and so you're kind of stuck in that anxiousness, and that'll affect the vagus nerve. But then people that have B vitamin imbalances, their nerves aren't getting enough nutrients, and so then there's always a little bit of a buzz in the nerves. And so then they just think that they're anxious. They just have the story that they have anxiety, but it's really coming more from the body and from the physiology than it is from the mind. It can show up as digestive disorders. It can show up as weird tics,
I think a lot of anxiety nowadays, a lot of it is, we're in this society where we're overly caffeinated, and people continue to just drink and drink and drink caffeine, and then they're not going to the gym, they're not exercising, and so they're just sort of wound up, and that energy has no place to go, and then people wonder why they're anxious.
Well, we're so disconnected.
And then they're going to get prescribed a drug that's supposed to help with it. And what's ironic, I've done some research on benzodiazepines, Klonopin, Valium, Xanax, and I remember, and this was like this is a girlfriend I had years ago, but she was taking Klonopin. And I was prescribed Klonopin like 20 years ago. And I remember, I was a young kid at the time, and like the doctor's just like, here, take this, because I had what I thought was a panic attack at the time. And this was this like 80-year-old doctor who's prescribing me Klonopin. And at that time, yeah, I was very much like the doctor tells you to do it and you do it, right? And, now I know better, but
Well, we're
we
unindoctrinating ourselves as a culture
yeah,
from that.
totally, totally. But so anyway, so I was prescribed Klonopin and I was on that shit for like, 2 years. And then I remember one day, I think I forgot to take it and I freaked the fuck out. And so I was like, dude, what? I don't want to be on this shit because of how it made me feel when I didn't take it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to like wean myself off and it was this whole thing. But years later, I'm dating this girl who's now taking it. And so I kind of tell her my story. I'm like, man, like maybe you don't need it. Like, how long have you been on it? And, I never want to try to like tell somebody what they need or don't need, but here was my experience with it. And she pulls out the pill bottle and then starts looking at Google, looking at all of the side effects. I kid you not. Like, she was reading the side effect list, like the fine print that they never really show you
Oh, yeah.
at first. And she must have gone on for 5 minutes reading side effects. And what was ironic is at the end of her reading that list, we kind of look at each other and it literally was creating the very thing that it was prescribed for in the first place. And it just makes me really believe in that, all drugs initially are prescribed as a stimulant. Every drug is a stimulant. And it might not have I'm not saying stimulant like a caffeine type stimulant, but it has an effect, right? And but eventually it all turns to poison.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what happened to me with Klonopin. But people are taking this shit, and I think being prescribed, left and right. And I think there's such a healthy approach to it.
Pharmaceuticals in our system these days. I mean, you're just seeing people more disconnected, more out of coherence. And so much of it has to do with how much pharmaceuticals in their system. But we're also so disconnected from the idea of self at this point, of working on yourself, of introspection. We're getting fed our media, and then now we have our belief systems and put into our brain, and we say, I'm an individual thinker thinking the thoughts that I've been told.
Yeah, right. I know. So do you believe in this idea of like a cult basically running the world? Have you heard of this, this philosophy?
I mean, I don't know if it's a cult, but there certainly does seem to be a negative oriented, a self-serving oriented fraction that has, for hundreds of years that we know of, going back to the Knights Templar, taken over and thwarted, causing all of our wars, causing all of our financial systems to be controlled. This idea that the Federal Reserve and the IRS are private organizations is like one of those things that blows people's minds. There's nothing federal about the Federal Reserve, and there's nothing about the Reserve. They just, like, our whole system is based on debt. How are we supposed to thrive as individuals, as a community, as a culture, when every dollar that we have is controlled and is indebted? It's not a free system inherently. It's an automatic matrix cage, right?
Yeah, I started thinking about this because you had said that, we're being fed, like some of the media we're being fed, we're basically being taught what to think, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so you've got the media that is really, I was talking to my son the other day because he's 3.5, he's watching the Olympics, and I was talking to him about the American flag and patriotism and trying to explain that to a 3.5-year-old and what that means. And then I thought about it later and I thought, it's interesting how you typically see a lot of United States medals being won when you watch the Olympics. Now, you do see some of the other countries win, but I feel like in general, you're seeing more of the U.S. medals. And that the same thing's happening when they're showing the Olympics in China, right? And they're showing the Olympics in Russia. You're seeing Russians. So how much of what we're watching is almost government-controlled propaganda, and how much of it is controlled to sort of support the agenda that they ultimately want.
Or even some of it's the agenda, but some of this agenda is just creating separation, right? So you end up in social media in an echo chamber where your thoughts are always being believed, even into the comment section, where the comment section will be have their own algorithm that are directed to reinforce your belief systems, which then just creates more separation and duality and division, thinking, well, see, everyone on social media agrees with me.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of that going on right now. There's a ton of that going on. And so do you think that the sort of propensity to go and be prescribed, drugs or like the quick fix, the pill, is that as a result of, 50 years of programming to kind of...
Well, so this is going back to that cult thing, right? This is all originated with Rockefellers. The Rockefellers actually took over the medical system, and they're the ones that actually, just like the CIA is the one that coined conspiracy theory. The Rockefellers, when they created the American Medical Foundation, they coined the term quack to start discrediting anybody that doesn't use their pharmaceuticals. And the pharmaceuticals all have petroleum products, which is coming from the Rockefellers' oil industry. And so they're setting up the institutions that are getting the funding, which then now is these are also the people that are funding the research for their grants, for any kind of project. So then there's a cultural interest about what wants to be studied, and they're just chasing the dollars. So they're actually just trying to get grants based on what the people above them that are giving them the money are interested in getting the results of. So we follow that many, many years down the road, and that leads us to here.
Yeah. And it's happening a lot. And so was it this that you started to kind of notice or pay attention to that kind of developed a passion for, like, I really got to help people? Or did you just happen to see these treatment modalities? And because it looks like you studied with some of the top people in this field.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So did
I've been
you
so
just
lucky.
see how they were able to help somebody and you were attracted to that? Or was there a greater cause or purpose at first?
Really, my dad was a Buddhist monk and a rolfer. And so as a little girl, I grew up with my dad in school, and I was his guinea pig, and we would do training. I would be part of his class and one of his guinea pigs. And one of his teachers at the time was this guy named Tom Myers, who's become a fairly well-known manual therapist, structural integration teacher, and talks about fascia and does a lot of dissections as well. And he lived with us for a couple years. So I just had this infusion into the bodywork world for a long time. And when I was at one of those cruxes in life, homeless, friendless, penniless, is when I decided to go to massage school after my brother said, you should do that. I said, okay. So I did that. And what I liked about it was the idea of having a career that kept me physical and also something that was purely good. I mean, people get hurt sometimes in these modalities. It does happen,
Physically hurt?
Physically, people can get hurt. I know I have clients that come after a bad chiropractic or a bad surgical incident, right? But for the most part, you're doing more good than harm, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And there's not this give and take of feeding into a negative system that is overlaid, right? But I just get so geeked out on the anatomy. And then as I started learning more about how the body and the mind are connected, then it just it stirred this deep curiosity. And then it was this relationship between my own personal journey of going through my healing processes and my own traumatic stuff and rewiring those layers that just kept me curious. And I still feel like I've got so much to learn. I get so much. I've been so lucky with my teachers, Tom Myers is a legend. Jean-Pierre Barral is a French osteopath who's treated 180,000 patients. So before he brings a treatment to teach us, he's done it on 3,000 people, and he's really has this art of listening. So you get out of yourself. As a structural integrator, we look at people and we say, how can I fix them? Right. Whereas Jean-Pierre's work, you kind of step back and you listen. with curiosity. You're like, what's going on with that person? Because the body hugs the lesion. And so you get really good at listening with your hands in the same way that a wine taster, sommelier, can like taste the region, the year, the how much rain was in there that year. They can do that with their tongue if they're really good. We can get that same level of sensitivity in our hands to be able to distinguish, well, where is this polyp in the kidney? Where is it precisely? What are the relationships to it? And how can I affect the vasculature and the tissues around it to be able to create a change in the system that can help rewire it?
That's fascinating. Holy cow. So when somebody comes to see you, do they typically say, hey, Daphne, this is my issue, I need you to fix this? Or are you, like with a new patient, are you doing intake where you're actually asking them to open up maybe about a trauma? And
No, traumas come up.
Okay.
Yeah, traumas come up. Sometimes, the intake, usually people come for pain. Pain's an incredible driver to want to create change in your life. And sometimes that pain is physical and sometimes that pain is more emotional. So clients come to see me, they're going through a divorce and they just know that the work that I do of working with the body and the mind can really be supportive in making sure that they move through this extremely stressful time.
And so let's use that as an example. So somebody's going through a divorce. They are very emotional. Maybe they're not the ones that decided to leave, right? So maybe the other spouse decided to leave, and so they're, they've got kids. Maybe they've been married for 20 years, and now their whole life is turned upside down. When you're doing this, these body treatments and this physical work, what do people experience or achieve as a result of the work? And what does that do for them?
Well, everybody's a little bit different. Every session, what they come in with is different. But, I've had clients that wear those aura rings that check in with them, right? So it's tracking their heart rate and their anxiety levels, how well they're sleeping, one of those metrics. And they've done so many things to try and downregulate their nervous system after, divorce and lawyers and stuff, and they can't do it. Well, after treatment, I work the way I work. Their body tells me where stress is, and it's in these little pockets. And basically, you just sit with it, like a little kid who's crying. Instead of trying to stop crying, you just kind of sit with them and let that peak happen, and then in the process of just witnessing it self-organizes and comes back in. And then we can kind of get into the more minute pieces of, is there a vascular piece going, is there an intervertebral artery that needs to be stretched in relationship so that there's more blood to the brain, because the deep right limbic gets a little bit more compressed in the process of this deep emotion. So we kind of work with both the emotional aspect and then also with the physiology to support the body and being able to get the right blood and nerves and nutrition into the area to find center again.
That's awesome. How do you decide what treatment you're going to administer on somebody?
The listening. So the body hugs the lesion. So what I do is with everybody, whether it's their first session or 25th session, we start with them standing, and I take my hand and I just put my hand on top of their head. And it's like a little sonar. I just I just say a little hello, like gently compress their head. You might not even feel the compression. But what that does is it puts the sonar through the system, and then the body tells me it hugs into the area. So the body hugs lesions, and so whatever's highest on the body's organization about what's out of balance or what's the lesion that's the highest in its order, it'll point to that area. So maybe that'll be, a kidney that's stuck, or there can be tension. The gallbladder's not draining properly, and so the hepatic ducts have a tendency to close. So it'll take me more into that liver area. So then I can do, from that general listening, I can do a local listening and get more information as I put my hand on that area. And I'll look at the structure. I'll feel down the spine. I'll check the pelvis.
This all comes as a result of you putting your hand on top of somebody's head.
Oh, it's crazy the amount of information you can get. You touch it very, very gently. Yeah. Wow. It's amazing what the body can tell you. I had somebody come in my friend's boyfriend, she wanted him to come get a session, but he was really dubious about, because,
right.
you know, who is she,
what
right?
is she going to do?
But he has chronic back pain. And I felt it. And there's an area of the spinal cord right at T8, T9 that has a tendency to narrow. And it seems like he had some kind of an injury there because the blood vessels into that area are starting to get even smaller. So he's getting a beginning of a stenosis right there, and it's going to start affecting lower in his spine. And that information I got just from touching the top of his head.
Holy cow. I told you this was going to be good today. This is awesome.
I mean, it sounds like magic, right? Like when people are on the table, it's like, whoa, how did you know to go there? You found the exact spot. But it's really, the body knows. The body hugs the lesion. The body expresses where the tension is. Whether it's emotional, it'll have what we call like a, you know, people say it's in the nervous system because it has that kind of electrical buzz to it versus something else that might feel hotter or duller, right? It can have a different quality to it. But like I said, I'm not sure it's in the nervous system per se as much as perhaps in the structure of the water, holding on to that trauma, creating that buzz. But just like in, you know, for instance, internal family systems, a type of therapy where you look at the different aspects of yourself. So let's say you're a rooster, walking around all strong, right? And so you've got this manager type that's really capable. Well, that part might be protecting, you know, it could be layers, right, of another part that's at the end of it, at the end of all these parts, just feeling really vulnerable and unsafe. And so your system says, I never want to feel that unloved. I never want to feel that unsafe. And so it's going to create all these layers of personalities and protections. And some of it might be, it can show up in negative ways like self-sabotage. It can also have productive ways of, I'm not going to feel my emotions. I'm going to work a lot. You know, and that will also show up in the nervous system as you know, for like if you get in a car accident, you're going to feel 8 emotions in a millisecond. You'll feel the shock, and then the shame, and then the I can't be tired, right? I have to really be aware, and I'm going to freeze, and you know, and all of that can happen in a fraction of a second when you get into an accident. And the work that we can do is just witnessing those aspects, because once they're witnessed, they get to reorganize and realize that they're part of a whole, and the whole is there to integrate and be in homeostasis.
This is awesome because so I've struggled with addiction, and because of that, it's ironic that you say that the rooster sometimes is protecting, you know, shame or guilt. And so there's a lot of shame and guilt I have as a result. Certainly feelings of unworthiness. I don't know if you saw that new book by, Jamie Lima Kern. Anyway, she started a cosmetics company, sold it for $1 billion, just wrote a book called Unworthiness. And you're right. I think it all does at some point stem back to feelings of unworthiness. In my particular case, it was like I was for sure putting on masks. I was trying to numb how I felt, but I still feel like there's a lot more that I have to explore there. And so how do you begin to help somebody with some of these treatments get past that?
Well, what I would do if somebody was coming to me with addiction, one of the things now this doesn't fall under my field, so I might say what I would do if I were in your position, because I can't prescribe anything, but knowing how much our neurochemistry can have an effect on our addictive behaviors or our ability to have homeostasis in our brain, I would suggest somebody look into, well, what amino acids can support your brain into being able to find a homeostasis. So if you have a ADD, a lot of times, and a lot of addictions are commonly people actually trying to find homeostasis. You know, they're especially if it's like ADD, a lot of people with ADD tend to go towards cocaine or meth, because they're actually trying to balance their own patterns, right? But you can do L-tyrosine as a amino acid that kind of stimulates the similar portions of the brain, but in a healthy, balanced way, kind of awaken the brains. So that's one thing I would do is like, how do we support the chemistry of the body to overcome the addictions, right? How do we do that? And then, well, what kind of addiction is it? If it's an alcohol addiction, then we'll listen into the system, right? But a lot of times that's going to go into the liver and the kidneys and often the pancreas. So we'll have to treat those in relationship to each other. I've worked on people that have been coke heads in the past, and they have a lot of damage into the nose and into the sinuses. So then there's going to be a lot of cranial work that happens. A lot of times that people end up in addiction, it also has to do with head injuries. Again, trying to find balance.
When I was younger, I was a gymnast, and I had an injury, and it was a head injury or neck injury, I suppose. And so doctors started prescribing pain medication to me. So that's really been my struggle over the years. And so for somebody that might be in that same, and it's really weird to see how like now this has become such an epidemic, right? And it's scary too. Like I'm just like, thank God I wasn't struggling with this addiction now when there's like everything's laced with fentanyl and you never know what you're getting, right? Unless it's like legit coming from a pharmacy. And even if it's coming, like a lot of times I heard in Mexico, it's coming from the Mexican pharmacy, but it's still laced with fucking fentanyl.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
So,
well, because fentanyl makes it addictive.
Yeah.
So even they found fentanyl here in Colorado, even on weed, not in the dispensaries, but street. Right? Yeah. Not because just because it makes it more addictive.
They must have the perfect
in meth. They put it in meth
amount, right, to sprinkle on weed.
They must.
It's such a small amount that's potent. But but for somebody struggling with an opiate,
so with opiate, it would be probably a different protocol, right? With opiate, they're going to have to get in their body. So those people, I would suggest to really do the cold therapies and the breath work, because they actually need to get their dopamine pieces back online. They need to want to feel alive. They want to, that's a big piece of it is these little ways of wanting to die. Cigarettes are that way, and a lot of opiates. It's like, I don't want to die, but I don't want to live. And it's that kind of gray in between area. Right. And that's, we go back to the cult, this idea of the government structures, this is intentional, because if you're not wanting to live and you're not sovereign and self-aware, you're so much more easy to control.
For sure.
Because they they hit you from multiple different angles. But in the TV, it's played at the commercials talking away put you in a theta state and put brain thoughts into your mind.
You're good at that. Yeah. Are you that voice?
I am that voice. Yeah, that's my other day job.
That's funny.
But part of it is getting people in their bodies in a way that makes them alive. So the cold therapy, that shock of the system,
like cold plunging,
cold showers, jumping in the river, that'll awaken a system. And same with the breath work. It helps to move so much through the brain, because a lot of times it's stagnation in the brain. We get into these bad thoughts, and the breath work can really help to reset the neurochemicals in the brain.
Talk to us a little bit about some of these treatments and what they are for people like that don't know Reiki and also Hakomi. Hakomi, I feel like I've heard, but I don't know.
Yeah, so Hakomi's an old school, like one of the first ways of doing body-centered psychotherapy. So somatic experiencing, co-regulating touch. There's a really great book called I'll come back to that book because it's blanked right now. But it's all about working with the body to release the trauma. It's from, therapy is this top-down type of therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy is top-down, whereas this would be more bottom-up. So you might tell me a story of getting hit by your dad, for instance, right? And as you're telling the story, we'll also be checking into your body. And then we might put the story aside and put that, on the side note for a minute, and just be with the sensations of the body, because a lot of times that trauma, it gets stuck in the way that in the body doesn't have a way to cycle through it. There's the Waking the Tiger is a book by Peter Levine.
Okay. Waking the Tiger is what
Waking the Tiger.
Okay.
And he uses the analogy of how humans and domesticated animals are the only animals that have post-traumatic stress disorder. a gazelle on the plains gets chased by a cheetah and gets away, it's not stuck in PTSD, always looking around and having anxiety attacks, right? Well, what happens? So they go and find a quiet place and they just shake. Their whole system just shakes and they just shiver and shake. And that's the body's system of releasing the trauma. But in our culture, we say, oh, calm down.
That's weak.
That's weak. Just calm down.
Yeah, don't show your emotion.
Don't show your emotion. And so then it gets truncated. And so in the work of the Hakomi or body-centered psychotherapy or somatic experiencing, we slow down and really start getting a sense of what's the body telling us? What's the body feel like? What's alive and well in the body? What's not alive and well in the body? Where do you feel tension? Where do you feel held? And we track the system from that perspective and kind of allow the system to start unwinding that way.
How many sessions? Like everybody's probably different, but
Everyone's different.
Before you start to see would you recommend typically somebody sees you every week for a month?
Depends on what their goals are, really. If I had a teenager who was semi-pro baseballer and had a surgery and the nerve in his elbow was caught after that. Well, he just needed one surgery to floss that nerve through, and that was it. Somebody who's going through a divorce.
One surgery?
He had one surgery.
Okay, got it.
And then, but he just needed one session because the nerve was getting caught, and he wasn't able to throw the baseball. He was a pitcher.
Okay.
He wasn't able to throw the baseball.
Yeah.
He just needed a single session, and then the nerve was moved, and he was fine after that.
What are you doing to get into I'm fascinated by this. How are you getting in there though?
Well, you just know the anatomy really well. I mean, I've dissected. I've done a lot of dissection.
I'm cutting his arm open.
Kind of. Well, you do it in your mind.
Yeah.
But you know where the anatomy runs, and where some areas the nerve, in that case, the nerve would be more superficial in some areas than the other, and you just kind of find the line. You figure out where the fascia is caught, and again, instead of we're structural integration, we'll try and open you up. The visceral work, the manual therapy that Jean-Pierre Barral teaches us is we kind of bring it in, we hug it. And what happens is then the neurons see each other, the fibers of the fascia see each other, and then they start reorganizing, and then they're able to be a natural spread. It knows how to reorganize. And so then the tissue just opens up on its own. So everybody's different. If you're going through a divorce, you might see me every couple weeks while you're going through the heart of it. If you're got into a car accident, we might see you a little bit more regularly for a little while and then send you out. If you're 2 years post-op from a disc injury and you still have some nerve pain, I'll probably want to see you kind of regularly for, a month or 2 or 3, and then taper you off and then see you as needed from there. Yeah. I have a client who's in her 60s and has had Harrington rods down her spine since she was a teenager. Well, those are the, when you have scoliosis. Harrington
rods.
Okay. If you have scoliosis, it's a rod they put down your spine so that you don't keep curving. But that means that her whole spine is fused, which means that, she needs to get work, once or twice once a month, every once or two, so often, just because her organs don't have natural movement to them to help keep them stretched and functioning. So everybody's story is unique.
So I've got one for you.
Okay, give it to me.
It's my story. So and now it's there's this thought where it's man, this has happened before, but at the time I was younger and maybe it didn't last as long, but
those are always the ones that come up. People don't realize, you hurt yourself when you're a teenager and you don't notice it, but then it just sets off a pattern. You can fall off a bicycle and throw your pelvis out, and now you have a rotation in your pelvis that sets you up for a disc injury later. Or if it's a woman, you might fall off your bike and then your uterus gets shoved over to a side, and now it's going to affect your menstrual cycles or even maybe possibly your fertility.
Well, so what happened here is I went from doing light exercise, really I was on the Peloton a few days a week and that was about it, to hardcore 6 days a week in the gym, but heavy lifting, kind of on a bodybuilder's regimen. I was eating that type of food. My diet got super clean and I started putting on mass. But this was about a month ago, and there wasn't like I did this and then it happened. But all of a sudden, my left, like this whole region just started to hurt. And it wasn't like a sharp pain. It was like a throbbing, like just always there kind of a pain. And at first, this outside like muscle right where the elbow kind of folds, that was super inflamed, and this one wasn't. So, just a couple people I was talking to were like, yeah, that's probably, like tendonitis or something. And I thought, okay, that makes sense just based on, I've never had it before, so I don't really know what it feels like, but just intuitively it sounded like, okay, that might be it. Except for then, I would do, like, I could do a bench press, I could do a lat pull down. And as long as I was really paying attention to positioning and focusing on just the chest muscle or just the back on the pull down, I was fine. But as soon as I did like an isolated bicep curl, the strength that it took here to come up, it's not happening. And then I even tried it once I had it up here, letting it down, that wasn't happening. So then I started wondering, man, do I have a bicep tear of some kind or tendon tear? And so I went and saw this therapist around the corner here that I've known for a long time. She does active release technique. Are you familiar with it? And so she's done some dry needling and she's done some shockwave. I've only seen her twice, but just this morning, I'm like, man, I don't know, maybe I need an MRI because this has now been, I feel like it's been at least a month. And I'm doing like all the things. I've got a massage gun at home. I'm injecting BPC 157. Although that's fairly recent. A lot of the stuff is fairly recent, but still I'm like, I don't feel like it's really getting better, or it almost feels like it could be moving. Like it's weird. Like it went from here to like now, like even my forearm and wrist are starting to feel it. So
pointing,
what the fuck is going on?
You're tracking a whole nerve line.
Yeah. And it doesn't surprise me too.
So
itis, neck injury.
Itis means inflamed. Right? So you inflamed something. We can just say you have an itis.
Okay. I have an itis.
You have an itis.
Yeah.
We could say tendonitis. That just means inflammation of the tendon.
Okay.
It could just be you were bulking up really fast and the fascia got too expanded, and how the nerves are starting to move through got a little bit stuck in one spot. And so now when the nerve isn't getting through, it's going to affect the strength coming up and down, and it'll start creating more inflammation around that area. Do you want me to feel and check it out?
Yeah, I'd love for you.
Okay.
You want to do it now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, guys, here we go.
All right. So just give me both your hands.
Okay.
Just relax them here. Yeah, give me all your weight. There you go. Yeah, so there's a lot of fluidity. Is it getting swollen in here? It feels like there's a fluidity imbalance that's happening right in here. And yeah, I think you'd actually be a pretty quick fix, to be honest.
You could tell all that just from holding onto my elbows?
Yeah.
My arms?
Yeah, you could point to it right there.
Okay.
That's the spot where it's.
Have you fix me then.
That's the spot that it's. Well, that's the spot that it's stuck.
Yeah. Wow.
And really, it's probably has to do with the relationship of you working out as heavily as you are, and you probably twisted something a little bit funny at one point, and something just got a little bit tweaked, and then you kept working out on it, and it just got more inflamed. The little things like that happen all the time. It's so common.
So what's Reiki?
Reiki's energy work. So it's like understanding, working a lot with which is where I started in my early days. And now, the Reiki shows up mostly just because I've expanded my understanding of the energy field so much. And I do a lot of Joe Dispenza. I've been to a bunch of his retreats, and I do a lot of the blessing of the energy centers myself.
Okay.
But Reiki in itself is energy work. So it's, as a baseline, you start learning how to feel your own energy centers, your own chakras through your body, and start working on that. And then you start learning how to feel it in other people. Well, Jean-Pierre came along and teaches this whole class on the thermal layer, which is like the science of some of this Reiki stuff, where 10 centimeters off the body, there's a thermal field that you can feel and palpate. Like you can bring down and feel, oh, that's where the heat is. And then you can follow that around. If there's a dysfunction be it emotional, physical, or physical, it'll protrude out. So you can feel on the system if there's an excess heat or a deficiency. Sometimes it's colder and you have to like, ooh, there's not enough information coming from there. So sometimes I'll do a feel of the body from about 10 centimeters off, and you'll get really good with your hands, and you feel, oh, it's round like a tube. Oh, I wonder, is that part of the large intestine? Or maybe it's the vena cava, the main artery in the abdomen. And you can start getting more information about where things are by the shape of them, how protruded they are. If it's really far off the body, it might have an emotional piece. If it's a fresh injury, if it's a bone injury, a bone break, then I don't even touch the body. And I've some guy in Mexico, when I was living in Mexico, he shattered his heel, and it had just happened. And we were able to get the bones back into place without even touching, because because the field, the thermodynamic field outside the body is so palpable on an injury that's so fresh like that, you don't even have to touch the body for it to have a strong effect into the system.
But you got to know what you're doing.
You have to know what you're doing.
Yeah.
You have to understand the anatomy and be practiced in being able to work into that dynamic field.
Were
Yeah.
you wearing the bone hair pick in order to do that? Is that your
That's part of my witch doctor power.
So, all right. So I want to kind of wrap up by talking about this idea of, and I'm paraphrasing, but like the mind, body, spirit, and really expanding into higher consciousness.
That's where we're going, right? Like as a community, there's some people that seem like they're getting more dumbed down and more indoctrinated and having more pharmaceuticals in their system. And then there's also people that are learning, I need to have sovereignty in my body.
Absolutely.
There's more people that are wanting to have their own farms and chickens and finding communities. So there's a micro to macro. There's an internal and external, as above, so below type of conversations. And there's a cultural shift into people wanting to have physical sovereignty in their own bodies and getting away from pharmaceuticals and understanding there's definitely a place for modern medicine, for sure. I don't want to discount that by any means. If I got into a car accident, I would want to go to the emergency room. If it wasn't a bad car accident, I actually don't want to go to the emergency room. I don't want anybody to touch me. There's nothing that they can tell me that I can't figure out from other ways. Fortunately, I have an amazing network of people here, so I know what to do. And a lot of people don't have that. A lot of people, there's so many different ways to heal. There's so many modalities, and it's hard to find the right person practitioner. Because, for instance, a lot of people do reflexology, right? I think if you're really good at it, you can transform somebody's life, right? But if you look at painters painting a bowl of fruit, there might be one or two really good paintings.
Sure.
And, the other 30 people in class aren't that good. That's going to be true in every industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether it's finance and mortgages, if it's painters, body workers, acupuncturists. So if you're trying acupuncture and you don't get a result, there's a chance that acupuncture is not the fit for you. Could also be that that modality is not the right fit for you. But I think people are starting to get more curious about, how do I stay healthy within myself? Because the whole consciousness evolution is learning to become more sovereign within ourselves and know thyself. Because when you're orienting from this place, you're actually, even though it's orienting towards self, you're actually service to others oriented. You're caring about more people because you're more whole in yourself. You're not operating from deficiency or depletion. You're operating from a wholeness. And when you feel whole, naturally what we want to do is help.
Well, the opposition doesn't really want us to be sovereign. The opposition doesn't want us to make a lot of money and to be healthy, right? They want to keep us really fat and sick and broke.
And they're succeeding, unfortunately.
And they're succeeding at it, yeah. So I think everybody now has even more of a responsibility to themselves, to their communities, to their families, to take personal responsibility for who they are and who they're becoming. Because it's in my mind, it's the only path forward as a society. Otherwise, we're turning over, really our democracy and our freedom to somebody else to control and tell us what to do. And it's almost, it's scary, but a lot of it is there already. But it's almost like this brainwashing that has taken over. And of course, and by the way, like, to be brainwashed is something that could really happen to any of us, right?
For sure.
Like, it's easy to look from the outside in and go, like all the cult stuff on Netflix, which I find fascinating. I'm like, how on earth did these people not see that? And I'm looking from the outside in, but the reality is when you're in it, it logically makes sense. It feels right. Like everything is pointing in the proper direction for you to want to take part in that. Mm-hmm. And, I feel like, the news, just the way that everything's set up for people to make money, although that's starting to shift, people are becoming more sovereign in that way, because more and more people are becoming self-employed, which I think is really exciting, but it's also, scary, because being self-employed is difficult. It's not easy.
I don't know if we're going to get sovereignty until we really get away from the Federal Reserve banking system. I don't know, like, never in the history of the world has there been a successful country when it's a debt-backed system. And that's what's feeding the wars. We've, over the last 20 years, we've invaded any country that didn't have a central bank. And we came up with a fucking excuse for came up with a silly excuse for it. Well, and a lot of people don't realize that one of the first things that happens in a lot of these countries once we conquer them, we install a new bank and their new government.
Well, the other thing too is a lot of the outside countries looking in, they call us the imperialistic United States, right? And there's a book I read by, and I'll put the name of the author in the subject line, guys, or in the comments down below, but it's called Nemesis. And this guy was a CIA guy who operated, I believe, in China, but he took account of the government spending on military. And I mean, this was written a long time ago, right? But even at the time, there was like $1 trillion budget, or I'm sorry, the expense for the military was $750 billion, $750 billion, but they ended up spending $1 trillion. So they were spending more money than what they had budgeted for. Well, where do you think they were getting the other, $250 billion? They were borrowing it from China. And so now we've got this massive debt with these foreign countries, and it's no wonder that there's this, there's so much political conflict because of it, and everybody's kind of got a, posture and position, and who knows really, and that's the other thing about politics that I find pretty interesting is, like, you might think that it's about this thing that you're seeing, and really there's 1,000 other things that you have no clue are even happening that are affecting other populations and groups, and it's all so interconnected. So, I always think, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a business person, it's important that you put a huge emphasis on personal development, self-development, on being able to really grow and become a better version of yourself. Dr. Joe Dispenza, I remember first hearing about him, I think back in The Secret, wasn't he? In The Secret, and guy's just exploded since then, but he's phenomenal. And I think that in order to perform at a high level, you almost have to find a way to reinvent yourself and expand your consciousness.
Totally.
And so what are some ways that people might be able to do that?
Well, first it's realizing that you're not that. It comes with humility of like, ooh, I'm not that version that I want to be, right? Meditation's a huge piece of it. What Dr. Joe teaches is really about getting your brain into you basically self-hypnotize yourself.
Okay.
And then you connect yourself into the version of you that's different. Okay. So you're basically, with quantum physics, all realities are happening simultaneously. So you're just connecting into what's that version of me that's different.
Okay.
And sometimes that means you have to have an altar to give up who you were? What are parts of the old self? And that's where you have to get really clear about what are the stories you're telling yourself? What are the belief systems? What are the behaviors that are holding you back? And be ruthless and really curious to catch yourself on all of these. Because once you really catch yourself in the patterns that's bringing you the things that you don't want, then it's also a lot easier for you to detach from that part of yourself and hook into the version of yourself that you do want to become.
That's awesome. It's been awesome having you on here today. I feel
really
like we could
enjoyed
keep going.
I feel like you and I could probably talk for hours.
Forever. I mean, there's so many different paths I feel like we can go down on this thing, but where can people find you if they want to check you out?
You can find me on my website, healwithdaphne.com.
Healwithdaphne.com.
Same with Instagram and TikTok, yeah.
All right, awesome. Well, go follow her. What's your Instagram handle?
Heal with Daphne, yep.
Okay, Heal with Daphne.
Thanks for having me, Darik. Yeah, me too.
Every time that I see a limit, what? I push right past it. Don't care if you got here first, the one to win is the last one standing. Say my life is like luck, nah, I had to plan it. The way I work is out of this earth. I can feel the momentum. Need it all, no fractions, dream it, then I got